Stephen from New York, who says you can't always trust peer-reviewed articles. Even credible sources can be wrong. So I'm going to bring Stephen in. Stephen, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
Very
Stephen.
well.
Yeah, so
you called last week and asked you to call back with this because you kind of left it at the trail end of the conversation. So if you, I don't know if Scott was privy to last week's conversation. So just briefly, for the benefit of Scott and the viewers, just go over what it was that your kind of objection was to peer review.
peer-reviewed articles could still be mistaken, and I do have proof about that. Just because a source is considered credible doesn't mean that it's definitely correct.
Yeah, as I said at the end of last week's call with you, Stephen, I agree with you. So I'm going to let Scott jump in to begin with on this one, and then I'll jump in a little bit later and kind of give my two penneth, as we say in Yorkshire.
Well, I guess what I would just say is, yeah, of course, peer-reviewed articles can't always be true. They're reviewed by human peers, and so there's always going to be that factor of mistake. Now, keep in mind that when we say an article is peer-reviewed, what we mean is that the peers are reviewing the methodology and the techniques that are used by the researchers, and so that's really what we're verifying there. They don't always recheck all of the data, although sometimes they do. They'll run the experiment again, but not always the case. And so when we're talking about peer-reviewed articles, we're talking about not perfect certainty. We're talking about using the best methods we have available. And one of the best methods we have available is to be checking up on each other. And so as long as we can make sure that other scientists are using proper methodology, then we can maximize the effectiveness, maximize the validity, maximize the power of the statements that they're making based off of their research. Does that make any sense, Stephen? What do you think about that?
Well, I have examples of peer review studies being incorrect. Like, for example, a long time ago, they used to think smoking was good for you in the medical community, and they even used to prescribe it for things like hay fever and asthma. And
Stephen, if I might just
as far as I know, that was a unanimous idea.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt with you shortly. Both myself and Scott have agreed that peer review can be incorrect. You didn't appear to respond to Scott's point at all in that, and I'd just like you to kind of respond to what Scott said about peer review being the process that's peer reviewed, and it, this kind of process that peer review goes through. Can you respond to Scott's point in particular? Because we don't disagree that peer review can be wrong.
Okay. Yeah, but I feel like a lot of other atheists put all their eggs in one basket. Like they only trust peer-reviewed sources. That's what, at least from what I've seen a lot of times.
Stephen, you're not speaking to other atheists. Atheism isn't a monolith. There's a vast array of views within atheism and on different subjects, and you're talking to two atheists right now. So it's probably best to, talk to us and kind of go off the responses we give you, rather than, what you believe other people, because we're not privy to those conversations you've either witnessed or had with other people. So let's talk through the process, because as I said, myself and Scott seem to agree with you that peer review can be problematic. Yeah. I think this is a subject which is a wide subject, and we have to take it on lots of different levels, because you get some kind of the kind of basic level of it, where you get some journals which aren't very good. You get some journals which are pay to play journals, which will accept anything. So on that level, before we even get to the peer review process itself, there's several kind of levels we go through. You get these pay to play journals. Some of them aren't very good. Some of them actually produce pretty decent articles. Then you get groups of scientists, so what we might call rebel scientists, who don't believe the kind of consensus in their subject, of what the consensus of opinion is. And in some cases, and we've seen this particularly amongst creationism, their viewpoint is so rebellious that they've actually tried to do away with peer review altogether, and they've started their own organizations where they publish their own work. And they do try and sneak it into the kind of mainstream journals and try and get mainstream peer review, but they try and do it through the back door. And I've seen I've reported a couple of these articles personally because the scientists involved haven't disclosed the organizations they work for. So there's a big wide range of stuff here. Of course, peer review can be wrong. Everybody's got a vested interest in this stuff. Even the best journals with the best scientists writing for them have still got a vested interest in it. But, when we talk about, I'm interested in what you mean, because it is such a wide-ranging subject. I'm interested in what you specifically mean, what the problem is for you personally regarding peer review process. Is it the whole thing that's wrong? Or is it specific areas within that you think are wrong? I'm going to let you answer, and then I'm going to give Scott the kind of floor for a little while.
Well, for example, if the majority of people conducting the study think something, it beats out a small minority that thinks something else that might actually be correct. And on top of that, organizations can lie as well for various reasons, for eminence, profit, stuff like that.
Yeah, but that flaw that you've just described as a flaw of the peer review system is a flaw in any system. That can be, what are our options here? Holy revelation? Clearly there's humans are biased and can influence that kind of thing too. But Stephen, have you ever heard of the phrase perfection is the enemy of the good?
No.
Okay, so what that means is that if you're holding out for something perfect, you're going to overlook many good options that might come your way. If you're saying perfection or death, perfection or nothing, you're never going to be satisfied. As long as there's humans involved in the system, as long as we have that type of flaw, if you want to call it that, endemic to the system, we're going to run into that problem regardless of how we're going about to learn about the world. But let me ask you this: even given that the peer review process is not perfect, can you make an argument that there's any other better way of vetting articles? Do we want to abandon all research, or are you suggesting that we still do research, but we just do away with peer review? Or what are you proposing as a better replacement here?
I think we should mix it with personal experience and also our own critical thinking. We shouldn't instantly trust it, is what I'm saying. Like, it's not the only way to find truth.
Okay, so let me interject here. So you said personal experience, and what was the other one? Personal experience and just your own critical thinking. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so are those perfect? Do people ever come to the wrong conclusion when they rely on their own critical thinking, or do they ever come to the wrong conclusion when they rely on their own personal experience?
They can, but sometimes people know things best because it's coming from their own head. So, yeah. So
the question then is, how do we know that the peer review process is worse than your suggestion?
It can be worse because people put too much.
It can be worse doesn't answer my question. I want to know what reason do we have to think that it is likely to be worse, or at least that it's the chance of it being worse is enough that we should not rely on peer review. Because I think the two things that you suggested as being better are actually way worse than the peer review process. Okay, the methods that you suggest rely on the mind of a single individual, your personal experience, your own critical thinking. If you have a bias, biases are notoriously difficult to detect in your own reasoning, but are actually quite easy to detect in the reasoning of others. There's the value of the peer review process. You can still also rely on your own experience and your own critical thinking, but then you also have somebody backing you up and reading through it and making sure that you're not incorporating your own biases. Do you see the advantage in doing something like that?
Yeah, well, I'm not saying it shouldn't be used at all as a tool. I'm just saying it shouldn't be the only tool used, and it shouldn't be like necessarily more accurate than personal experience or your own rational thinking.
But what if it is more accurate? What if it can be shown to be much more accurate than just relying on your own opinion?
Well, there's irrefutable evidence that it's not always accurate, like going back to the smoking.
That's not what I asked you. That's not what I asked you. I didn't ask, what's the evidence that it's perfect? I said, what's the evidence that it's better? Less imperfect.
That it's imperfect, you said?
No, I want to know what's the reasoning that using other forms of methodology are better. Because if they're not, then what's your point?
Like I could give like an example, I guess. When I used to get like an infection or something, I would always get antibiotics, but in the long run, it actually kind of weakened my immune system. Now instead, I just kind of let my own immune system take care of it, and I find that since I've been doing that for a few years now, I find infections so much better. But that would never be told to me through peer review, for example.
So you have one data point. I'll count your data here. There's one data point. You think that's impressive?
Yeah, to me personally, yeah, because I found that, and it's based off antibiotic resistance as well. That is a real known thing, but I find that when I get a bacterial infection, for example, it goes away much faster nowadays, and it's much less severe since I've not taken antibiotics. I'm not saying that I know it's important sometimes, but I'm not saying for other people to do that. I'm just saying it works for me personally.
Stephen, I want to put a scenario to you. Imagine you're a fisherman fishing off the coast or wherever it is that the closest large body of sea is to you. And the furthest you have gone out to sea is 10 miles and fishing. So your whole knowledge of that area of fishing is 10 miles. And in your experience, in that 10-mile area, there are 100 sharks. Do you think that it would be better for you to make the conclusion that in that entire ocean of thousands and thousands and thousands of square miles, there are 100 sharks? Or do you think it would be better to get the opinion of other fishermen who've been out 20 miles to sea, 50 miles to sea, 100 miles to sea, and get all those different data points and put them together and come up with a larger picture? Which do you think you would get the most accurate information from?
A mixture of both.
Why would you get the most accurate information from a mixture of both? If you've got your single data point and another 100 fishermen who've fished a far wider region of sea, why would a mixture of both be the better method?
Because they could be, they could not care about the information they're presenting. They could just be saying anything.
So could you.
but I know I'm not because I'm the one. The claim would be coming from myself.
So it seems then that your objection to peer review is not the peer review process itself, but that you don't trust those other people supplying information for peer review. Is that fair to say?
Kind of, yeah.
So why don't you trust those people? Is there any specific field that you don't trust in peer review? I kind of asked this earlier, but I don't think I asked it in a manner that you may have kind of grasped quite as easily. Is there any field in just the sciences, the published sciences, where you think one particular field is more untrustworthy than another? The majority of scientists within that field are more untrustworthy than in another field. For example, earlier I mentioned, young Earth creationists. Now, those people would consider people like geologists and biologists untrustworthy because it goes against their opinion. Do you have a particular field in which you think the scientists are untrustworthy?
Yeah, there are. I can't think of a specific example, but fields where fields where the primary purpose isn't philanthropy, fields where there's profit to be had based off something, and if they said the true thing, it could take away that financial gain. But I can't think of a specific example.
I mean, all fields will be motivated by financial gain to some degree.
Yeah, but in some, I can't even think of a specific example. But I know that in some, if they say the truth, that could go against something that would give them financial gain, maybe a product or something. I don't know, or an idea. I don't know.
Is there a way that you're kind of testing this to verify that your distrust in this particular field, and in these 100 fishermen that are outside your particular fishing waters? Is there a way that you're kind of testing this to show that they're being untruthful, or should have that label of being distrusted, of being untruthful? Have you tested it, or is it a hunch?
Well, there's no evidence that they are being truthful.
Scott.
So, Stephen, to me, it sounds like you're saying, well, I'll just be frank with you here. Do you find that you disagree with peer-reviewed articles more often if it's a conclusion that you don't like? Do you find yourself questioning the process that they got those conclusions more if that conclusion disagrees with something that you already believe in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if I realize something and a peer-reviewed article goes against what I realize, obviously, I'm more likely to question its credibility.
Awesome, that's great. Have you ever heard of something called confirmation bias?
Kind of, but I forgot what it is.
Okay, so that is when you put more emphasis and remember the data, the research, the results, the claims that happen to agree with you. You're more likely to remember the hits and you forget the misses, right? And so we know that naturally we're inclined to, if somebody disagrees with us, our minds just naturally try to pick that apart. Some of us more than others. Our minds try to pick that apart and to show how that person is wrong. And so do you think that could be happening here? Because you haven't shown any evidence, you haven't given us any reason to think that peer-reviewed process is less reliable than the other things that you've mentioned, personal experience, your own critical thinking. In fact, just talking about confirmation bias here shows that actually, if you're relying on one single individual, you are way less likely to get reliable results. And that's how statistics works. That's how the peer review process works. Put many eyes on a problem and you are less likely to have those results influenced by personal bias. Okay, we know that personal bias exists in you and me and all of us. And the best way to reduce and eliminate personal bias is to, hey, can you take a look at this? Okay, the more eyes we get on a problem, the better, the less likely we will have that result will be influenced by a single individual's personal biases. Does that make sense to you?
I know what you're saying, but another point I wanted to make is if people find out these organizations aren't as superior as other things, that's the kiss of death. Their organization is finished because they can properly come to truth.
Well, that would be something that you'd need to demonstrate. Of course, peer review process can lead to unreliable and incorrect results. However, it's way less likely to happen than if you don't have the peer review process in it. Did you hear what I said when I said about many eyes on a problem helps us to eliminate personal bias? Do you agree with that?
To some extent, but how do you know these organizations aren't lying to you?
You can never know. We're not talking about certainty here. We're talking about reliability. We're talking about trust. And there's our thing, you know, trust is not a black or white issue. It's all shades of gray. And so we're never going to be able to find the perfect information. We're never going to know everything because we can't get access to all the information. And so what we're doing here is we start with a process where we have incomplete information. We just have a handful of research. And so how can we make sure that research is the best? Is we can make sure that we use the best methodology. How can we check that methodology? Have somebody without my personal biases. You don't have my personal biases. Richard doesn't have my personal biases. So the more other people that I get to look at my process and my results, I'm more likely to catch those personal biases. And I think that's what you're missing here. It's not about the conclusion. It's about the process. That's the power of peer review right there. And since we know that nothing that we can do can ever guarantee perfect results, okay, all we can do is try to maximize our effectiveness and maximize our reliability. And that's what that process is for. And that's what it does, because it helps us. There's still going to be possibility for bias and for influence. And, you know, sometimes you just picked a bad sample. That can happen too. Okay. But you're going to be less likely to involve personal biases if you have more than just a person. And to be honest, until you can show otherwise, and I don't think that you can, but I'd be open to looking at the possibility. But until you can show otherwise, that's why there's no reason to give any credence to individual story, personal experience, and that kind of thing, because you haven't shown the money yet. All you've done is saying one person's mind believes this, and that's not all that impressive.
Stephen, do you remember earlier on in the call? Stephen, earlier on in the call, I said to you that there's a huge range of things when it comes to scientific journals and peer review. And I think what you'll probably find if you look into them, I've read lots of journals on lots of different subjects, even outside of my own field of study, just because I have an interest in those things, because I'm a boring old tit. But, you know, there's lots of journals out there. And I think what you'll find is that the ones that are more likely to skew information, the ones that are more likely to allow information which might not be as rigorously tested by the peer community, are the ones that are financially invested, those pay-to-play journals, the ones that are taking money. So, you know, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can publish in them. It seems to go counter to your claim. The kind of money is a motivator in kind of getting bad peer review stuff up. It seems to be the ones that are bad to begin with, the bad eggs to begin with, who are motivated by money. Now, there are certain fields, I'm not going to mention any field in particular, but there are certain ones that spring to my mind where, yes, money in profit specifically is a motivating factor. But the important thing to note here is that they still want the information to be accurate, because if the information is not accurate, it's the peer review kind of process is not followed and misinformation gets out there, that's actually financially damaging to them. It doesn't. It's not the other way around, as you seem to be suggesting, that you know, misinformation produces more profit. It's actually the opposite way around. If you've got a medical journal publishing data on a new drug, and that peer review process isn't followed properly, and a lot of misinformation is coming through, that drug is actually unprofitable if they find out down the road that there's some flaw with it, some fault with it. Whereas if there's a good, rigorous peer review process in place there, that drug is actually profitable for them. It works for them. So a good peer review process actually does the job it's meant to do. It's not a case of kind of twisting the facts. It's a case of getting the facts correct to begin with. And I think that's very, very important to know. Stephen.
Yeah, but the thing is, they want to claim that they know the facts before other organizations. The main goal of a lot of organizations is supremacy over other organizations.
But it's counterproductive if they get those facts wrong. If they just jump in and say, well, we're just going to make shit up because we want to get there before our competitor, when that shit hits the fan, that actually costs them a lot more money. If they do the process right to begin with. And you've got to bear in mind as well that a lot of these places aren't acting in isolation. There's not just one journal or one set of scientists usually acting in isolation. All the scientists in that field are working on problems that are adjacent to each other. They might not have the same set of expertise in a particular area, but they're working adjacent to each other. And getting that thing right is really, really important for that profitability.
But they could keep that lie going. It could be something really hard to find out. They could know it's a lie, or they could just be careless about it and claim truth without enough evidence.
Stephen, there's a lot of buts here. Remember our conversation from last week when we were talking about the aliens? And, we kind of said, yeah, but aliens could come and be making crop circles. It's, they could be doing it. They could be the ones causing the crop circles. But actually, we know that people create them, and we know that weather phenomena create some of them. So why do we need to take this extra step of saying, but what if? Because unless you're after absolute 100% pure knowledge, which is a ridiculous thing to try and get hold of, it's, that's irrelevant. What is relevant is the best information we have for forming a conclusion. And that's exactly what peer review is there. It's, as Scott has said several times during this call, it's there to test the methodology. It's not there to test a particular claim. It's there to test that the methodology is being carried out properly.
Stephen, I think it's kind of ironic that your position on this call is kind of showing the flaw in your thinking. Okay, you're an individual and you distrust peer review, and so you're questioning it because it has different conclusions than you would wish would come up. You, by approaching the problem of peer review this way, you are leaving yourself open and vulnerable to personal bias. Your own personal biases can affect your opinion of peer review. If you get multiple different perspectives, that's the value of peer review is diversity. We have people that don't have the same personal motivations. We have people that don't have the same professional motivations. Very often, the motivation of the reviewers is to tear down the approach and the results and the methodology of the researchers. And so you're displaying that particular vulnerability right here. You have nobody to check you if you're only relying on your own opinion, if you're only relying on your own results. And so I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard you address that issue. Having multiple sets of eyes reduces the chance of personal bias. Period. It can't increase it. It can't increase the chance of personal bias because you have different individuals. And so I don't see how you feel like you have any kind of argument here. You haven't really said anything. You've just kind of repeated your same doubts and mistrusts. And it's fine to doubt and mistrust, but to make claims of truth based on that doubt and mistrust, I think is a little misguided.
But it's an obvious inference that they do lie, because obviously if there's such a big organization, they're going to want to be superior. If someone has, let's say,
if it's likely for multiple people, sorry, if it's likely for multiple people to lie, it's more likely for an individual to lie.
Not necessarily.
Stephen, have you ever read any journal articles on any subject whatsoever?
Yeah.
What journals have you read?
I don't know. Random. I don't even remember.
Did you have any kind of eggs in the basket of the field? Have you got any kind of academic background in the field of this journal that you read?
No, but I think I am good at assessing information.
That's fine. I've just pulled a random journal because, as I said, I read a lot of these fucking things. I've got the British Journal of Religious Education in my hand here. It's a reputable journal. It produces articles on British religious education, as it says on the tin. Do you think you could read that? Do you think if I sent you one of the articles from that and said, right, next week I want you to give me an assessment on one of those articles, if I just pulled one at random, and you could give me an assessment on that article and give an accurate assessment of what the authors were saying? Imagine yourself peer reviewing that article and pulling apart the kind of, the methodology that they're using, making sure they've gone through the right methodologies, making sure that they're not getting, they're not making any wayward claims, not making any making sure that the authors have no particular biases that influences the article. Do you think you would be able to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That is a challenge accepted. I want you to email me whatever our email address is. I'm sure someone will put it on screen because I forgot what it is. Talk Heathen at whatever our email address is. That's it. It's on the screen now. Please give me an email at Talk Heathen. I've lost it again. At atheist-community.org, I think it is. And let's have that conversation. Email me. Let me know who it is. I will send you a journal to peer review, and then I want you to give us a call back. And I'm going to let you go now. I want you to give us a call back, and I want you to do it as if you are peer reviewing that article. And I want you to give me all the breakdown of what you think the author has got wrong, if they have, what biases you think they're employing, if they are. And let's do it that way. Let's really, really get into it